Hi, welcome to Physionic, where we learn the body from the macro to the micro. If that's something you think you'd be interested in, then consider subscribing. And in this content, we're going to be investigating a paper wherein they discover, or at least believe that they've discovered, the reason for the extreme pain that's associated with endometriosis in women.
Learn your body, a science-based education.
Now, this particular data comes out of this paper that I dissected, and I've got my notes listed as well as the study for you to investigate for yourself. But with that said, let's jump into a little bit of the methodology. So how did they go about this particular study? Now, going into the methods of this paper, they investigated this condition by two different means, one of them by a mouse model and another one by looking at humans specifically. So this is a highly translational study, which was really nice to see. They investigated mice by injecting these mice after going through removing all the ovaries from the mice. So this is essentially eliminating or controlling the hormonal aspect, so it's not going to be due to progesterone or estrogen and things of that nature, at least not largely, because they're removing the ovaries. And these mice had their ovaries removed for 7 days, and then some of the mice were injected with endometrial cells that were then allowed to grow for a number of weeks, creating lesions outside of the uterus, as you might see in endometriosis. And then they went about and tested the mice through a variety of different means, but I'm going to be focused on more of the inflammation aspect. So they measured the amount of TNF-alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha, as well as cyclooxygenase 2. Both of those are markers of inflammation, and they found that they had elevated levels of inflammation in these mice. They also looked at the amount of immune cell activation, so how many macrophages specifically were increased in the endometriosis condition, and they found elevated levels of macrophages. However, when the mice were treated with a macrophage suppressor, they were able to eliminate that immune component, which is going to be important as we move further into the data. So at this point, the researchers know that endometriosis leads to increases in inflammation, leads to increases in, specifically in these macrophages. So they wanted to translate that to humans, and they did that by removing macrophages from humans and then plating those onto a cell culture plate. And then they either added the peritoneal fluid or the abdominal cavity fluid from women that have endometriosis or women who do not have endometriosis, and they wanted to see how the fluids from either one of those two conditions would impact the macrophages, would impact the immune cells. And what they found was an increase in the expression of IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, which is a general growth factor leading to greater growth. So you can imagine now you may be seeing some sort of a connection there between this growth factor and the lesions, the continuous growth, the continuous enlarging of endometriosis. But not only that, they also investigate BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a more specific growth factor for neurons. And what they found is that in both conditions, you see increases in the expression of both of these molecules when the macrophages are added with the peritoneal fluid from the endometriosis women. So here you've got some good evidence for growth factor release from these particular macrophages, and it's certainly attributed to endometriosis. So another aspect they wanted to look at then was, are you seeing increases in neuronal growth? Are you seeing greater projections from the neurons when they are stimulated with endometrial fluid? And what they found is, yes, there is an increase in these neuronal projections that occur when they are stimulated or when they're exposed to endometrial fluid. And that is also the case if they add IGF-1 alone, or a variety of different factors. So then they wanted to investigate, okay, well, if we ameliorate or get rid of IGF-1, if we inhibit IGF-1, what happens? And in both conditions, with endometrial fluid or with just IGF-1, of course, you saw decreases in this neuronal development. So what this implies then is that these macrophages, or these immune cells, are most likely infiltrating into the endometrial lesion and then leading to this overexpression of these particular inflammatory markers and growth markers that are specific to neurons, And what is most likely happening is that the macrophages are then leading to this lesion growth, or the increase in the lesion growth, as well as the invasion from neuronal projection. So, and then we translate that pain from maybe micro movement within that environment of the lesion to these neurons that are now projecting into the lesion itself, which allows for that communication to the brain. And that's why women experience such excruciating pain, because you have this connection between the immune system trying to help, but ultimately leading to greater recruitment of neurons, which is then leading to these neurons infiltrating into the system. Now, one final experiment that they wanted to investigate was the amount of IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, in women who suffer from endometriosis. And oddly enough, they did find that there were increases in IGF-1 in those individuals. And then they plotted a correlation, so just an association of the amount of IGF-1 and how that correlates with pain sensation, and they found that there was a moderate association between the two. So overall, what can we take away from this is, well, there's a decent amount of information here. I think that there certainly needs to be a lot more information, and we are stretching in certain regards in terms of trying to create a model for how this is occurring. But overall, it seems that macrophages specifically, or just immune cells in general, are activated by this endometrial tissue that's not supposed to be outside of the uterus. So they start infiltrating into that area, leading to increases in inflammation, leading to increases in growth factors, and even some of those growth factors are specific to neurons. So then these neural cells start leading their projections to the lesion, start entering into the lesion, and then you've got this neuron that can then communicate pain back to the brain. So that is most likely what is happening in this situation. However, like I said, there needs to be more research on the topic to really hammer down exactly what's going on. But there is certainly an immune component, and there is certainly a neurophysiological component involved in the process. So hopefully you found this informative. I certainly found it incredibly informative, really interesting to read into. And with that said, I hope I have the pleasure of speaking with you in the next one. Have a good one, guys. Bye.